Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be completing the questionnaire of Timur, who's head of the Archetype Center, a group based in Kaliningrad which practices what they call modern socionics. So this is a different socionics group to the World Socionics Society. They have a rather different approach to socionics to us. I think perhaps rather different definitions, a slightly different process. They prefer a video questionnaire rather than an interview methodology. So what I like to do is a means of outreach is to go through their process, see what I get typed in their approach to socionics, see if we can compare and contrast and create more of a dialogue. We've had a couple of our members already go through this process, leading to quite some interesting results. So without further ado, let me go to the questionnaire. It's just here. So yes, this is Timur. I'm reasonably sure he's an LSI. I think he types stuff out as well. He's head of the Archetype Center. He has 11 years experience in psychological analysis. And basically the idea is that it's going to be a video, 40 to 50 minutes ideally. We'll have to see if I can stick to that amount of time. I might go a bit over. So apologies in advance. So yes, let's start with the first question. Introduce yourself, tell us a little about yourself, where you from, city, country, what do you do, etc. So, well, my name's Jack. Hi, I am the founder of the World Socionics Society, which is pretty large for a socionics group, Facebook group primarily. We've also got a YouTube channel. We got what else we got? We got Twitter. We've got various other kinds of social media. We have meetups in different countries across the world. Of course, none of them actually running at the moment due to COVID-19, but we're planning to set things up in Jakarta. Had things going on in New York and London, in Minneapolis for a while actually, and some other places as well. Yes, so that's the main thing which I'm interested in that I like to do. In my own day-to-day life, I am a psychologist, a business psychologist. So specializing in the workplace, helping people to be better at their jobs. I like interviewing people for leadership skills and also designing different tests, not just socionics tests, personality tests in general, also aptitude tests. I'm designing an interesting spatial reasoning test at the moment using 3D paint and 3D build to design certain shapes. So I do quite a lot of that at the moment in my role. I also, in my spare time, I have a range of interests. Socionics being the main one, but also I've always loved mythology and I like history, like interested in zoology as well, and musical theatre, performing arts. I'm actually being put up for some sort of audition, sort of against my will at the moment for this role. I've been an extra on film sets before, but never actually gotten into the final cut. Done a few musical, quite a bit of musical theatre in university. I like anime, I like watching anime, and also various TV series. I like classical music. I like also like opera. I find opera quite fun. And what else can I say about myself? Well, I I like linguistics. I like etymology, the meaning of different words. I find that fascinating as well, and understanding different trends in different societies. I find that interesting. So that's all. So I sort of I like anything which I find interesting at a particular moment. Recently, I've been trying to learn the periodic table. Because I sort of want to see how much I can get set my head around chemistry. Because I'm never very good at sort of the physical side of chemistry, so I want to understand it more structurally. And also, I'm just interested in stuff. Basically, I do stuff I'm interested in. I also dabble in a bit of politics. Ran for a councillor role a couple of years ago. I couldn't actually do much with it because I had to move up to Oxfordshire. I have a fiance, getting married in, well, where do we get married? It's a good question. I thought we were going to get married in June, but you know, COVID-19 happens, so we'll have to see what happens there. So yes, where am I from? Sorry, where am I from? I am from initially London. Born in London, bred in London. Spent a little bit of time in Manchester, a little bit of time in Oxfordshire, but primarily in London. And at the moment, I'm in Hertfordshire, which is just a bit outside of London. So I'm very much a Londoner, although I often find myself at odds with your classic kind of Londoner, I guess. I don't know. It's interesting. So yeah, so I do stuff I find interesting. Question 2 now. What is question 2? So question 2 is about giving the definition of the following terms. At least one sentence for each point. Oh goodness, at least one sentence. So, well, let's start with order. So order there's different ways of looking at order. So the most common usage is the idea of some sort of imposition of will to bring things into alignment in some way. You can give orders, give commands, often barked commands to get people to line up. You can also talk about order in terms of things being putting into a row, into a line. The idea that order has been created, that some sort of alignment has manifested in reality through the imposition of order. Now that's one kind of order. And the idea is that it also leads to a more harmoniously functioning society. The idea that we need law and order in our society rather than chaos and death. So, and this idea that order stands against chaos in some way, that by creating rules, creating structures, creating that sense of familiarity, that is a bulwark against all sorts of horrible, chaotic things happening to you, say diseases or foreign invaders or other sorts of things which people living in certain towns and cities would have found quite scary. And the idea that a wall around the city was the sort of manifestation of that order and a creator of order, some sort of authoritarian figure, usually at the top of the hierarchy, could be the creator of that order with different people who follow his or her command. Policemen, for instance, or town guards would be maintaining that order through some sort of benevolently forceful way. Now, that's one kind of order. There's another kind of order which doesn't need force to be applied, and that is a sense of natural order, a sense of order which doesn't require any imposition of will. And this can best be found in mathematics, it can be found in theoretical cosmology as well, but trying to find the underlying rules and orders upon which things turn. No one's forcing it, there's no pushing things into place. It just is, and it just hasn't been any other way. It's been based on something which is very refined, very almost mathematically predictable, and there's a certain beauty and harmony in that kind of order. So yeah, there are two different ways of looking at order here. I think in terms of the societal order, but also in terms of the metaphysical sense of order. And of course, there are then, so in between, you have certain orders which people create in a more conceptual way, which they set out their particular categories and make sense of things. You can say that socionics is an ordering. Model A is certainly an ordering. So yes, there are different ways here. There's certainly different ways of conceiving of order. Next, freedom. So freedom is an interesting one because people often consider it to be some sort of positive thing. I say positive, and it's the presence of something, how much freedom. But really, it's very much a negative thing. Not negative as in bad, negative as in absence of something. Freedom is to not be clapped in irons, not to have restrictions on you. And that's the thing. Freedom is the absence of restriction. But then conversely, that is then the maximization or increase of potential. And freedom for many people can be a scary thing. For other people, it can be a very rewarding and very encouraging thing. Myself, I'm very much inclined to want to maximize the freedom I have, the capability of doing things without actually doing all of them. But for other people, freedom can be a scary thing because again, it's the opposite of order. It is actually that interplay with chaos, because suddenly, by being able to do anything, you suddenly overloaded in the decision of what you actually want to do, and that can be a very scary thing. But yes, freedom can appear in all sorts of different ways. It's your own personal autonomy, your ability to make your own decisions and control your own life. For some, for others, it's a sort of freedom just to be able to do whatever you want whenever you want and not feel as if there's any sort of nothing holding you back. And freedom doesn't have to be a very sort of imposed absence of rules sorts of thing. It can be more subtle, be more of a social freedom, the feeling safe to speak out in a social environment where people may require conformity. Being safe to air your concerns as well, being feeling free to actually air vulnerability, having that psychological safety. That's another kind of freedom. But more typical kinds, say freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and those sorts of freedoms. And you can see freedom and allowing that potential to play out, allowing people to make the decisions, can lead to benefits. Sometimes it can lead to bad situation where people then abuse that freedom and go in the wrong way, and people then try to order things back because freedom can lead to problems. So, very complex idea of freedom, but at its basic emphasis is that absence of restraint, being free of restraint. The idea of being free is being free of something. Next thing is mind. So mind is an interesting one. It's often thought as being it's sort of like a combination of different ideas, all quite abstract. Typically, as was initially considered to be something to do with memory, some to do with rational thought, some sort of entity, some sort of abstraction, which holds on to different ideas, hold on to different experiences. So it's an experiencing thing, which also focuses attention. That's the two parts, and also uses faculties to think things through, to reach certain decisions. I think those are the main parts of what people think of as being mind. Indeed, someone says that someone has a brilliant mind, well, they mean that they either have very rich experiences or they have profound logical, rational faculties. If someone's feeble-minded, it can be in terms of a lack of imagination. It could be a lack of logical rationality. So that's the main ways in which you consider mind. And the idea is that mind is both linked to the brain, but also considered to be something a bit separate from the brain. Because the brain is very much a sort of physical, the neurons firing. And people say, well, that mind is also that. But the mind's always considered being some sort of abstract, amorphous whole which resides within the brain in some way and sort of floats above it. And in a way, which goes into the idea of consciousness, that mind is about, or at least partially about consciousness, and what consciousness is and how it develops. Now, I did a philosophy for my BA, so I did a lot of talking about the mind. But this idea that the mind is something which is sort of, you could say, I think it's probably something which is generated out of a complexity of the brain. And the mind is something which is perceived to be something alive, something more than the purely mechanical, perhaps because the purely mechanicals reach a level of complexity that cannot be understood. And once you miss that once you miss being able to calculate such complexity, you create that thing which is amorphous, appears to be amorphous, appears to be abstract, which could be the mind. So yeah, that's what I think about the mind. Stupidity is the next one. So stupidity. Now, this is an interesting origin of stupidity. It's about being stupefied. Before it was about being sort of someone who lacks intelligence or lacks common sense, which is what people call now. It used to be about someone who was struck dumb, someone who was stupefied by an amazing, awe-inspiring event. And the idea that we're overwhelmed by some sort of experience, but there's nothing we can say to it. There's nothing we can explain about it. It's beyond our ability to explain. So, and over time, it became, rather than someone who is stupefied by their experiences, it's someone who's more consistently unable to handle, perhaps, the experiences in sort of daily life that to others may be entirely explainable and manageable. To the stupid person, it's someone who, when presented with these sorts of challenges in life, they're unable to get through them. They do not possess the mental faculties to grasp what needs to be done and to find some sort of solution. It could also be someone who just through whatever fault of their own, you also is through a fault of their own, ends up in bad circumstances, bad outcomes. And people call themselves stupid. It's not because they are stupid, it's because they've done something wrong. So the stupid person becomes someone who repeatedly does something that is wrong. But from that, it implies, as it used to imply, a lack of intelligence. Now the word stupidity is just doing things wrong, someone who just does something wrong. Now we get to traitor, which is another interesting word. So traitor is often meant, it literally means someone who has betrayed trust, someone who is treacherous. Now, it is interesting because you could use that for a close one-to-one personal relationship. So let's say Polly was talking to Sally about a secret, and Sally then disclosed that secret to Anne, and as a result, Polly thinks that Sally is a traitor. Well, that doesn't happen. Polly does not call Sally a traitor. We don't use the word traitor for personal one-to-one relationships anymore. Instead, traitor is understood as someone who betrays either some sort of code or some sort of collective which is put under the said code of conduct. So a traitor is usually a traitor to their country, traitor to their group, traitor to their affiliation. It's become far less of a one-to-one thing. Even it could be that. It's become more about someone who a group has placed trust in because they have declared themselves to be committed to certain codes, certain rules, and they've gone and they've broken those rules or acted against the interests of a said group. Then the group would call that person the traitor, and they could then burn them at the stake or exile them or whatever else. And it's interesting that being a traitor, having treachery, is seen as being the worst of all of the sins, at least according to Dante Alighieri. Treachery was the last circle of hell. It was the one which was frozen over, where people were stuck in the ice. You had the worst of all traitors, Judas. Interesting here, he was a traitor in terms of a one-to-one relationship, but also, I guess, to God by Christian theology, that he betrayed God. So the worst of treachery, but still a personal relationship treachery. But we don't use it that way anymore. But he was so sunk under the ice you couldn't even see him. So I think that was no, that's not right. Sorry, he wasn't sunk under the ice. He was being chewed on by Satan in the ice. Yes, that's what happened. He was being chewed on by Satan with Satan's 3 mouths. Yes. So that's traitor. I never called someone a traitor. I'm not inclined to think that way, but I know that this is how it's defined and other ways in which it can be defined. I should say the same for certain kinds of order and other words here. I like freedom, though, and mind. And I think I can be pretty stupid at times, too. Morality. So, morality is the next word. And this is an interesting one because I did a for my dissertation, I actually wrote about morality and its linking up to type. So I have a nuanced view on this. I think that morality can be conceived in different ways. The main ways can be more of ways within ways, I could say. At the most basic level, I say basic level, the sort of level where people don't really think about morality, tend to call morality. People say, oh, it's good and it's bad. Morality is good and bad. And what is good and bad? Well, if I feel something's bad, it's bad. If I feel something's good, it's good. So that's one way of thinking of morality, a sort of emotional way, where you just follow the pangs of one's heart about something. But I was more interested in the sort of morality where it's more about logically thinking out what is right and what is wrong. So different ways of doing that. So one is deontology. Deontology is the idea that what is right or wrong is based on certain principles, and that the right thing to do is to follow those principles. The wrong thing to do is to break those principles. So different ways of doing that. The way that Kant did it was he thought that moral rules are those which are made into categorical imperatives. But if everyone were to do that, that would be fine. That people wouldn't hurt, people wouldn't suffer. And that bad things are those which, if you try to make into categorical imperative, they led to bad outcomes. So, but there are other, and they used to talk about other sorts of things which would be immoral because they lead to contradictions in what you want and what you actually end up doing. So yeah, that's one way of thinking morality in terms of a sort of coded basis of certain principles and their contradiction. Another way is consequentialism, different ways of viewing consequentialism, different ways of viewing deontology. You see deontology being a bit like the Ten Commandments are pretty deontological if you think about it. And that would be a coded kind of morality, a rules-based kind of morality. When you get to consequentialism, it's purely about what is the outcome of this? Is it maximizing good, or is it leading to bad? Is it, or just reducing the amount of good, you could say? And if you go to, say, Jeremy Bentham, you have hedonic calculus, where you can literally calculate and add up number of good points and number of bad points to figure out whether a decision is good or bad. And the idea of good or bad points for him was about pleasure, maximizing pleasure. So if there's more pleasure, then it's a good thing. If it's less pleasure, it's probably not the best option. There are other options which can maximize pleasure better. And then you have to weigh up different kinds of pleasures. Like, is it sort of base pleasures? Say base pleasures, I mean the sort of pleasures where, say, you are putting your toes into warm water and enjoying the sensation, which I do like to indulge in from time to time. But also supposedly the higher pleasures. And the higher pleasures, those are the ones of intellect and reason and meaning and purpose and self-improvement and growth and self-actualization and all these other words which are thought to be higher pleasures, as it were. I think it's good to have a mix of pleasures. Personally, I like what's the word? I like a pick and mix pleasure. But yes, and then there's always sort of arbitrary rulings over which pleasures go over where, and eventually just boils down to personal opinion. So that's another kind of morality, maximizing pleasure by any means necessary. You can do all sorts of bad things which seem bad, but if they're for a good outcome, it's actually good. It's a pragmatic approach to pleasure, approach to morality, you could say. And another and probably more interesting view is one of Aristotle, which goes into virtue ethics. And personally, I think this one has a great deal of potential in socionics. The idea that there's certain virtues, certain good ways of being, say being generous, being courageous, being someone who is also proud, but having a golden mean, not being a huge braggart, but at the same time not being so lacking in pride that you debase yourself. And finally, sort of golden means in between. And I thought about this in terms of socionics, and you could even see the information metabolism elements as representing certain virtues, certain good behaviors, as it were, and that these could then come together in a socion, in a society, to so that if no individual person has all the virtues, you can have someone else who has virtues that you don't have, and you can sort of admire each other and get better at it through mutual learning, you could say. And I think that is an account of morality which could apply most well into socionics. I find that one perhaps the most interesting. Although in terms of what I personally do in my life, I find I end up thinking more deontologically, but I kind of balance it a bit with the consequentialism. I try to find a deontology which doesn't run too much against the consequentialism, because otherwise I find that deontology is not very sustainable. Yes, so now we get to God. So God is another interesting word. Now, God actually comes from this idea of that which is invoked, that which is called upon. And that's an important thing. God is not a self-identified thing. God is identified by others to something. Other people identify the God because that's the thing which they call upon. They invoke to help them through certain struggles, because this is some sort of being, some sort of manifestation which has greater power, greater capability and potential, which people who would be the mortals, you could say, do not have. And that person can be called on, invoked on to make things happen which nature is not yet at the moment letting happen. Say there's no rain, you pray to the god for the rain. Say there is a war you need to fight and you may die and your family may be left with with no one to provide the bread for the family. Well, you prayed to the god of war so that you win in your war. And more recently in our history, we've combined the different gods who represent different things for solving different problems through their greater power, as it were, their great ability to solve problems through some mystical means. We've managed to combine this together into one God, one almighty benefactor. And we've seen that person as being also the creator. God being something which not only is invoked upon to help us through challenges in our life, but also something which created the world and has put us in some sort of moral and spiritual journey, going through the presence of evil, for instance, to develop spiritually and therefore be rewarded a place in heaven in the afterlife. So I find God is another interesting, very interesting word. All these words are interesting, really. If you look any word, if you look into it enough, you can find that it's interesting, in my opinion. So yes, that is God. Human being is the next one. So it's interesting because human being, there's two words here, not just one word, and that's important because you can look at human as what is human? Homo. It is a hominid, a hominin, not hominid, a hominin, and hominin are those. And those sections of the primates, of the apes, of the great apes, those sections which walked upright, which we've called man, Homo man. And so it's a certain collection of groups which is not too easily distinguishable, actually, from the beasts, from apes, from monkeys, from prosimians like lemurs. But the point is, this human, this Homo is also a being, and that's important. No other creature is called being. There's no squid being. There's no whale being. It's only human, which is called the human being. And the reason why that is the case, the reason why they use the word being, is because the human has traits which supposedly make it not a beast, something other than a beast, which is a being. The opposite of the beast is meant to be the being. It could also be a vegetable, but of course not going to call the human vegetable, are they? So it's going to be the human being. And the idea of being is that it has this has the ability to think in a salient way, the ability to actually, not say it, so in a lucid way. It has lucidity of thought. It is a sapient. That's it, sapient being. It is some sort of organism which, rather than being reduced to sort of base reactive instincts, say hunting, feeding, breeding, pooping, and all those other sorts of things, rather than just following its instincts, it is something which can think about itself and can actually think about what sorts of decisions it can make which are going to break the natural instinct. It is something which can look in the mirror and identify itself, rather than to see another beast in the mirror and jump at it. Of course, there are other beasts which actually can do that to some degree as well, but we like to think that we're special in that way. And we are special in many ways. Human beings have the ability to think creatively far beyond what any other animal can do. The ability to also to form long-lasting communities, unlike the poor octopodes who can't. That's one of the things holding them back, is they're not very sociable octopodes. They just have sex and then it kills them. But for human beings, we have formed society to actually share knowledge, to share ideas, new ways of looking at things, new ways of building things and making things better, and ordering our environment in a way which is successful and sustainable for the long term. And we have religion, we have faith, we have beliefs which are actually less rational than those animals, those beasts which just respond to their environments. We believe things that can be mystical and fantastical, whereas an ape doesn't believe in anything mystical and fantastical. So these traits, these qualities, are what we call something as being a being, rather than just being a beast. So that's the thing. Human, that is talking about what sort of species we are. Homo sapiens sapiens, the wise man. But also, we have being, to say that we are of the species, but we're also something different from all those other beasts out there, which, poo in the dirt. We do other things which are better. Saying now, obviously, plenty of humans also poo in the dirt, but you know what I mean. Okay, next, we're on to work, the word work. Now, work is different ways of looking at the word work. So, physics talks of work as being a product of energy and displacement. The idea that by putting energy into something, and if you've moved something as a result, that movement through the amount of energy required to move it, that is work. And people think of work in in many specific manifestations of that. There's always a sense of putting energy or effort into something for some sort of purpose, some sort of change in the environment. The idea is being a desired change, something which you want to happen rather than an accident. You can put a lot of energy into something which is an accident or a bad thing. You wouldn't call that work. So work implies energy put into an achievement of some sort. And some kinds of work can also be seen as laborious or drudgerous, an unwanted sacrifice. But other people see work as a very rewarding thing, work which leads to some sort of outcome which you find very pleasing. And some people, some personality types, actually feel that things aren't really to be savored and enjoyed unless you've worked for it. So work be seen in a negative way, the laborious thing, or I have to really work, that's a strain, the bother, why can't things come easily? Or you can look at it in terms of, oh, work is something which gives things that meaning. So yeah, that's work. And finally, we come to boring person, the words boring person. Now, I'm assuming, for the sake of brevity, brevity, oh my goodness, brevity, I'm assuming that this is not someone who digs. This is not a member of the Boring Company. Was it? I think it was actually. It wasn't Elon Musk. Is that the Boring Company? No. Okay. I'm assuming it's not someone trying to dig anywhere. I'm assuming it is someone, a person, who creates the feeling of boredom. Right. Now, what is boredom? So, boredom is that level of familiarity where it's no longer soothing, but it feels stagnant. It's where it takes you back to that order and chaos distinction. It's a very Jordan Petersonian sort of distinction, that you need a little bit of chaos in order, otherwise it becomes too stagnant, too restrictive. Well, another side of that is when something is too familiar, you feel there's no change, there's no stimulation for your brain, things start to feel dull, and your brain looks for more stimulation, something new, something interesting. So what a boring person is someone who is bringing you things you've already seen before, and those things are not the familiarity that brings nostalgia. It's the familiarity which you don't want. It's a familiarity which you've seen many, many times before, you'd rather not see again. When a boring person is called a boring person because there's a subversion of what you really like or want from a social experience, a negative subversion, a disappointment, as it were. A boring person is a disappointment. Because when you go to socialize, when you meet people, new people, you want to be exposed to new ideas. You want to be exposed to new experiences from people who can entertain you, who can put things in your mind you hadn't considered before, or can tell you about their experiences, maybe very, very interesting. Now, a boring person is someone who's not doing that. You go to a social event and they are not giving you those fun, exciting, or interesting experiences. They're giving you stuff you've seen so many times before. You're actually trying to escape from them and going to socialize as a means of doing that. So they carry that disappointment, and we call them boring because, in a way, we're disappointed. We're disappointed we haven't been exposed to people who have something new or interesting to say. So that is the boring person. Others can also say that it's about the way in which they speak. There are two ways of viewing, actually, not just a lack of interesting things to say or novelty, but also a lack of charisma, a lack of energy in the way in which they come across. a lack of doing things which gets the heart racing, as it were. That's also carries a sense of chaos, but a different kind of chaos. And a boring person sometimes speaks very dull, and there's very little variation in what they say. For instance, that could also be boring, very matter of fact, very much just to what you expected. Get boring. So yeah, that's what I think about the boring person. What someone calls a boring person. Now, I do not actually find many boring people. I find people who find people boring. I personally do not find boring people because I think if you get to know people better, you can find plenty of interesting stuff going along. Even the idea that they would be boring to people is in and of itself an interesting thing to explore. That's what I personally think. So, this is why I get into psychology. Let's move on to some of these other questions. So, let's go to question 3. Is there a need for censorship? What kind of information should be limited or restricted in the media? Now, this is a question which I've asked myself quite a bit. I know where my biases lean. My biases lean towards freedom of information, people being able to say pretty much anything, being okay with saying that, and also the idea of all this information we have, the things we keep private. I've always been a very public person. That's why I'm doing a live stream right now. I've been very happy airing my dirty laundry for all people to see, because I think that some of the pongs and smells could actually be interesting for people. And I've always been someone who's been very happy to share whatever is part of me. I've always been very open in that regard. I never had trouble with it. But I know that there are plenty of people who do have problems with their personal things being shared out in the media, in other environments. And that's led me to consider, is complete freedom, where people could find out whatever they want and share anything they want about you, is that okay? There's also a question of telling lies, libel, for instance, using false information to create a damaging environment for others. And is that meant to be allowed? Could malicious intent, could the desire to create harm for others, should that be allowed to play out in a society? And that's another question which I've considered. At the moment, we do have libel laws. Most countries do have libel laws. And I'm thinking that there could be a lot more suffering if you allow people to speak freely in a way which is deliberately wrong. And I think that is maybe a satisfactory compromise. If people are speaking deliberately wrong to cause harm, as long as you can establish that's the case, that could be a good reason to censor what they're saying, to prevent them from saying that particular thing. There's also the speech which, if believed in that moment, could lead to immediate death. Like, for instance, fire, fire, then there's a stampede and someone gets squished to death. So that could also be something which you may want to censor just to save life and limb. But in general, I would say that. Oh, also incitement to violence. When you're telling people to go out and kill someone, is basically like killing them yourself, but you're telling someone else to do it. I can see that also being a legitimate reason where you censor that kind of speech. But then there's a sort of censorship where I said press freedom, where can the press air whatever facts there are, true things, true information, but should everyone be allowed to know all that information? Now, I think there is something to be said about the government having some plans it may be working on to achieve certain objectives, so that people should not know about those plans. Because if you do, because otherwise they won't be able to achieve the plans they can do, and they won't be able to protect people. Maybe that's another acceptable compromise on freedom of speech, where to achieve aims which are important for people's safety, that they may need to keep something quiet for the time being, with the promise that as soon as they can, people will be able to know about this sort of thing. Again, my bias is very much for people knowing stuff. People, if things being open, people knowing and finding out eventually. I take a pleasure in telling people things and how they may react to it. I think that just puts so much more potential in the world, rather than people not knowing, and people just moving by without actually interacting with something which was true, which was there. And then there's kind of censorship where someone has private information, a private person, as private information which is taken by the press and put in the public eye. I think of, say, celebrities and saying even even the identity of people who are accused of crimes but not yet guilty, not actually found to be guilty of those crimes. And situations like that, where by people getting information, they could either come to physical harm, like someone who is accused of being a rapist or a murderer, but is not actually found guilty of those crimes. Should people know their identity and hound them and ruin their life, even though they were actually found to not be guilty? That's one kind of censorship that maybe one could consider, but then how to do it. And another is, I said that about someone who's private, say a celebrity, right? Say a celebrity is, say they take their pants off and they beat one out in the lounge, and let's say there happened to be a little crack in the window, and a paparazzi managed to film the entire thing and make a sex tape and release in some sort of tabloid. Should that be allowed? Should that private action, and something which everyone does, but should someone be under constant threat by being famous or being subject to that sort of embarrassment? That's another thing which I wonder, should that maybe be censored? Is that the sort of information which people one, want to see, and two, is it the information which actually, for us to exist harmoniously in society, we should not be under constant threat of that being turned up and revealed to everyone else? So yeah, maybe that could also be something which could be censored, where it's personal, private stuff, it's not anyone else's concern, and the person does not consent to that information about them being put into the public eye. I think the consent part is important. So yeah, I think those might be the kind of information which could or should and justify be restricted in the media. I'm still not entirely sure how much it should, but certainly to have these debates and discussions to see where people are on these issues, because I think freedom of speech is a very important thing. So each thing that we do needs to be seen as an exception to the rule, and a justified exception to that rule of freedom of speech. I think we can't just treat that as a light subject. It needs to be thought of exactly why are we making these exceptions to an otherwise lack of restriction on speech. So now we turn to question 4. What events of the modern world disturb you the most? Why? What do you think has to be done to fix the situation? Oh, I think the thing that disturbs me the most is rap music. I can't stand that stuff. No, I'm joking. I don't get disturbed about events in the modern world. I don't find it disturbing. Sometimes can make it sound that way for alarm, but I don't find it disturbing. I've already considered some of the worst ways in which society can develop, and I can see it turning around for the better over the next few centuries. And I know that bad things are going to happen eventually, whatever they are. I don't know. I don't know what will happen. Like, I think of things which may happen and which are likely to happen, but I don't know what will definitely happen. So I don't know what exactly is disturbing. I mean, I could say that we may be sliding into more of an authoritarian style of government, but when I say, is that really disturbing? We've lived for most of our societal lives under highly authoritarian governments. Things have never been better than they are right now. I don't just assume that society will continue to get better. I think it could easily get a lot worse. We need to be wary of that, but I don't find it disturbing, because if it does happen, like, okay, I just need to think about how I'm going to manage and survive and thrive in that sort of environment. Right now, we're in a COVID-19 situation, which many people will be finding quite disturbing. The idea, for instance, for me, that if my grandparents were to step outside the house, there's a chance they can catch an illness which has a reasonably high chance of killing them. So that could be disturbing, I guess. But at the same time, I'm thinking, you know what? They're in their 80s. They live far longer than most other people in societal history. Back in the Roman era, if you're 40 years old, you're thought to be an old man. So in terms of perspective, I don't find a lot very disturbing. I find it sad if my grandparents were to pop their clogs. At the same time, I know that I'm lucky to even have all 4 grandparents who are in their 80s. Not many people who can claim to do that. My fiance can't make that claim, certainly. And so, yeah, I don't think there's a lot which really disturbs me. I felt that I've made my peace with the majority of things which could happen. And so what do I think has to be done to fix the situation? Well, depending on what it is, there are all sorts of fixes. I don't know if they'll actually work. I can talk about how they might work. I can be reasonably confident about some aspects, but I still have to deal with uncertainty. The most present disturbing thing, right, for most people, doesn't disturb me, but the most present thing which I think needs to be thought about and something needs to be fixed for society to carry on working, if society working is an important thing, that would be solving the COVID-19 situation. Now, I do respect what Sweden is doing, in that it isn't clamping down and everything and disrupting the economic environment any more than is absolutely necessary. I think it is inevitable there are going to be lots of deaths in COVID-19. The question is how to keep the deaths down in all respects. So you could keep the deaths down in terms of reducing the people who may get COVID-19, keep everyone protected from COVID-19. But you could also think about other parts of this, right? People who are dying from economic fallout. You could even be that more people die in the long term from the economic fallout than from the virus itself. So that's another thing to consider. Some countries aren't considering that very much. Say Spain, you could say Italy hasn't considered it very much. But then there are countries like Sweden, which is considering the economic factors over the virus. And that is fine if you've got a health service which can at least manage numbers of people who are seriously ill with COVID-19. Even then, people will die. We know people will die. People are dying, have died, unpreventably have died. And we need to make our peace with that as well. But in terms of the preventable deaths, minimizing preventable deaths, I think, is the important thing here. So what we don't want to have in the UK, where I live, in the UK, is a situation where we allow the virus to spread uncontrollably to a point where more people are seriously ill than our health service can manage. And so we have to eventually choose quite arbitrarily who lives and who dies. Some people say that may already be happening in care homes at the moment. So when I'm thinking about how to fix that situation, I'm thinking you've got to, and I agree with the government's view that you've got to delay the peak, spread it out over a long enough time for the health service to be able to manage and look after and treat those preventable deaths out of them next to those which are, of course, unpreventable. You've got to delay that peak. But eventually, I think, work towards herd immunity. Now, that could be via vaccine, but that's likely going to take a long time. It could be about enough people getting infected, going through it, and surviving, that it's okay. And most people, it seems to me, get it, and it's absolutely fine. So personally, I'm not worried about contracting COVID-19. I think it's very unlikely I'm going to be in the small minority of cases where someone who doesn't have an underlying health condition, is not an old age pensioner, gets it and dies. It could still happen. But then again, I could die. I'm probably more likely to die in a car crash than die from COVID-19. Knowing myself, I probably am quite a bit more likely to die in a car crash of COVID-19, but I've still passed my driving tests. I still plan to be driving and taking that risk with my life. We all take risks with our life every time we step outside the house. So, and even if we stay in the house, we're taking risks of our life. There are risks everywhere. So I think going towards herd immunity as soon as possible without causing your health service to succumb to the large numbers of people needing treatment, having to choose who lives and dies. That's the way I think it should be done. And doing that so that you reduce the economic impact, which can lead to all sorts of other deaths along the line. That's what I think. It's not an easy fix. It's a sort of long, careful looking, seeing if it's working, maybe try something a little bit different just to slow things down or speed things up, because we don't know what we're doing. We have no blueprint yet. We've had many viruses in the past. We have far worse conditions in the past. Say, the bubonic plague killed way more people than COVID-19 has killed so far, or probably will kill. But it is still something which we're figuring out. We're not used to pandemics. We haven't figured out the way of solving them in a global economy. And that's the thing. This is one of the first major pandemics of a global economy. So yes, those are my thoughts on what is probably disturbing the most. But it doesn't disturb it, but I think other people are clearly very disturbed. Okay. Question 5. Describe the situation in the world says, well, describes the situation in the world in 2017. I imagine they mean 2020 now. I think this is an older questionnaire. And then give a brief forecast for the coming years. So the situation COVID-19 oriented. I'm going to try and consider it outside of COVID-19 as much as I can in terms of what the developments were. So developments that were, at least in countries like the UK and the US, is an interesting move. It's a move away from finding leaders who are more technocratic or even more conventionally highly managed, charismatic, the Tony Blairs and the Bill Clintons, towards politicians who have that sort of authentic, I say authentic in the sort of quotes authentic way of speaking out and sort of shattering and pushing against social and political norms. There's a desire for change both from the political right and the political left. Both are looking for change in either ideological change on one from the left, or a change in personality to fight this ideological change from the right. So I find that as quite an interesting development. Other developments, we are more than ever connected, highly connected in the internet. To me, to say that is trite now. Everyone's saying the same thing. We are highly connected. I'm talking to way more people than someone in my position would 50 years ago. I'm I'm like some sort of priest with a gathering of loyal attendees, right? I wouldn't have achieved that station in life way back before there was internet, but I do have that platform. I have a platform of hundreds of people, 1,000 people actually, 1,000 subscribers. Now I get that through the internet. We are so connected. I can talk to anyone I want at any particular time. That's a major trend. And we're only becoming more connected through more social media to share more aspects of ourselves. That's why I think that, well, it's why my ideas on, the lack of censorship is almost inevitable. We're going to be able to find out everything about each other at some point in time. So that's why I see we're becoming highly connected. But at the same time, we're also going through trouble in adjusting to those changes. Big, major changes, major differences in our world. This progressivism, which is changing a lot, we're having trouble adjusting to that. And we could also be losing certain parts of value which we once had. We may be almost too willing to move forward without looking back and seeing what we may be missing. Certainly, there's been less of an emphasis on the family. There's been less of an emphasis on the local community, because now we don't see ourselves belonging to any particular community. We are denizens of the great internet, which includes everyone everywhere. And that's part of a general trend, a sort of broadening of our circle of belonging, from down to just the smallest group in a cave, all the way up to a local town or village, up towards a nation or country or an empire, to a global community, which we're in now. That's new. We've never been part of a global community before. And we're still navigating what that means. And we are, and I say we could be leaving behind some of the important part of the local, because the problem of a global community is that you can't get that day-to-day immediate support. You can't also naturally guarantee the support of the global community for all your individual specific problems, because the more removed people are from you, the less they know about you, the less they are even tied to you based on, for instance, things like family, like blood. And family is something which has been a very sustainable and important part. Marriage as well, an important organized way of bringing two people together. Things like this are being moved away from, happening perhaps less often now. And the emphasis of family, well, now if you have your older grandparent, you can send them off to a care home, where the government seems to be letting them die at the moment for COVID-19. So there are erosions and developments at the same time. To you can say that every point in time has been erosions and developments, but these are the erosions I'm seeing and the developments I'm seeing. The question is, where will things go? Where will it go? I don't know where it will go. I'm not sure. I don't. It could go one way. It could go a completely different way. Maybe we'll be, I don't know, brains in vats by the end of this, because we've uploaded ourselves to the internet. Or maybe we don't go for a continuous progression of technology and progressive values. Maybe instead we undergo some sort of societal decline. I like the projections of Oswald Spengler. I think he had some very interesting insights. He compared the development of Western society with that of Roman, classical Roman society, and how in the space of 100 years, once the Roman Republic had reached almost the apex of its might, its power, it degraded internally and it fell apart. It lost its vestiges of a democracy, well, a republic rather than democracy, vestiges of a republic, and became a dictatorship. An emperor is a glorified dictator. An empire is a dictatorship. So it became a dictatorship. And I wonder if, at least the projections of the augurations of the augury of Oswald Spengler is that we will end up becoming some sort of dictatorship, probably led by the US, could be by China. China's already pretty much there in terms of a dictatorship part, which could then conquer the rest of the world. That war would come back. We thought we'd seen the end of war. Nah, war could always come back. There's no reason why the way things are so nice now, they can't become something a lot darker in the future. And I think we'll then come back because we can light again. I think we go through phases and shifts. But I'm not sure exactly which way we're actually going to go. We could end up like highly what's the word? We could achieve singularity and become sort of robo cyborg people in the internet, or we could end up as some sort of futuristic empire. Maybe technology will carry on increasing. Maybe have some sort of huge war, at which point we won't be able to use technology. We'll be post-apocalyptic, sort of like in Mortal Engines, where we can't use a technology anymore. But I think for the moment at least, I think technology will continue to advance and grow. And I think that it makes sense, at least from what we're seeing, that perhaps culture may be degrading over time as technology increases. That's what Spengler thought. I can see that happening. I can see how, for instance, I say rap music. I don't think it's very good music compared to classical music. I'm sorry. I think old-fashioned art and old-fashioned stuff like that it brings something of more. It's more beautiful for me. It's more satisfying to listen to and indulge, as I find the more sort of modern stuff, depends what it is. Like I like music from the 50s, a bit of an old fogey. I really like 50s music. I also like the 80s. I thought the 70s was not too impressive. 90s was sort of, yeah, it doesn't take itself seriously. That's okay. But music since I've had trouble relating to. I've had trouble enjoying, listening to and enjoying. And I wonder if maybe this is some sort of deterioration of culture as technology increases. So, in terms of the predictions, and not my own prediction, as I say, this is Oswald Spengler's prediction. I think that prediction seems to make a lot of sort of intuitive sense, but I'm not going to commit to it because I could see it going that other way where we just become singularity. And to be fair, actually, maybe that's also the same thing, just a different way. Instead of having some sort of big empire and we lose our democracy, we lose our sense of freedom of speech, our own will, our sense of individual, and we just subservience to the great god emperor, whatever it is, the Warhammer 50,000 style, you could say. Instead of that, we being a singularity and being almost losing our biological nature and losing the ability to experience real quality anymore. And it's just noughts and ones. Maybe that is also a degradation of culture for the increase of technology. So maybe it all leads to the same road. I don't know, but it sounds pretty cool anyway. Question 6. Right, question 6. No, hang on. I'm able to share my screen anymore? What happened to my screen? I'm sharing my screen again. Come on. Share the screen. What's happening? Yes. There we go. Question 6 is, what trends in society of your country do you see? I think I sort of answered that question. Specifically for the UK, I think it's following very much the Western trend. I don't see the UK as standing out against the Western trend. There are certain differences, certain flavors. I think that the UK is still trying to figure out itself. It's a country that's been quite open-minded, quite tolerant, open to difference, open to eccentricity. That's one thing I love about the UK is that it is so open. But also, hang on, tea break. Oh, I let it go cold. Ugh. I'll just finish it off. Okay. So, yes, I think that the UK's its peculiarities, it's still trying to figure itself out. It doesn't have any sort of strong, culturally accepted credo or rules or structures. It's sort of an embedded culture. It's sort of an embedded understanding that isn't very well articulated. But that's fine. I think that's more natural, organic, and I actually prefer aspects of that. But I can also see problems. I can see problems in terms of then conveying and communicating that to people who are coming in to the country who haven't had the chance to embed certain aspects of those cultures. And it leads to sort of this multiculturalism, which, being open to immigration is important. You've got to have immigrants. You've got to have people who contribute to culture to bring good things. But going through immigration requires an integration, requires a process of factoring in this newness and making it conducive to the whole. And I think by not having a good articulation of the British culture or creed or whatever it is, by not having that, we're not doing very well at the moment at the integration. That's because the rate of immigration has increased. It's far faster than we're used to sort of naturally developing and managing. And I think that's causing certain cultural shifts and developments. I can see that playing a role in Brexit, not the big role, but a role in Brexit. I think autonomy, as for an island nation, tends to be quite important anyway. Japan also, autonomy is very important. Also, Japan has the issue of, it's also quite cautious about immigration, but the UK is far more open to that because they've been invaded by different peoples all the way throughout history. You've got the Angles, got the Jutes, you've got the Saxons, of course. You have the Romans coming over, you have the Normans, you have all sorts of immigrants coming to the UK way before people started varying in skin color or language. Well, no, definitely varied in language, but skin color, for instance, or faith. Actually, with him, it was faith because the Saxons were actually pagans and the Britons by that time were Christian. But I need to get back to the point. The point is, I think that the UK needs to has a particular flavor on these same trends which we're seeing, where it's not quite able to articulate itself. And I think it needs to be able to articulate itself so it can best make use or enjoy or capitalize on the wealth of immigration that has come into our country and factor in all that newness. Next question 7. What kind of person should govern in the country, and what form of government is the best? You may give examples and or your explanations and thoughts. So, I am I should say the first question. What kind of person should govern in the country? The kind of person varies. The ideal kind of person varies. It depends on the needs of the time. It depends on what the country wants, what the country feels they need. It's interesting. If you look at American presidents, you can see a certain, we went through the personality types of American presidents. Each one satisfies some sort of need which the previous one opened up. So, for instance, take George W. Bush. He didn't provide that much. George H.W. Bush, very much a practical, hands-on manager sort. He didn't provide much of that sort of visionary charisma. Whereas Bill Clinton did provide that visionary charisma. Take Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. It was more about Richard Nixon than anything. The sort of the moral decline that happened following his impeachment. Well, his near impeachment. He was going to be impeached, but he left before he could be impeached. And there was sort of a jaded times as a result. And you take Jimmy Carter, meant to be this new moral purification president. People felt good that they brought in this sort of seemingly moral figure. So things like this, each president creates the next president. Obama's lack of initiative, lack of driving force, um, was something which created Donald Trump as being the ideal president to fit the hole left by Obama. Each president creates the hole which is then filled in by the next, I think. So I think in terms of what kind of person should govern the country at the moment, I think someone who is an innovative problem solver, someone who thinks outside the box, who can also keep people's spirits up in a time of great malaise. And who is that? Boris Johnson. He is the kind of person who should govern in the country at the moment. He is very well placed, I think, for where the society is at the moment. A society which has been through a period of malaise and stagnancy, a society which has been frustrated by a lack of innovative, can-do problem solving and optimism, largely created by Theresa May, who came before, very, very different prime minister. So yes, that's who I think should govern in the country. And what form of government is the best? Well, I think the form of government is the best is the one which I accompany at the moment. I am a big fan of these democracies which are constitutional monarchies. I like those. I like them more than republics. I think that the good thing about having a queen is that she occupies some sort of ideal that she herself she represents an ideal without actually acting out that ideal in some sort of tangible, material sort of way. She doesn't act out her power in any way. She sits as a figurehead, something to look up to. And by doing that, she carries a sense of symbolism, a sense of, there's a religiosity to it as well, a sense of, she's a symbol of the country, as it were. That's what the monarch has become over time. There's a gradual process from what used to be a conqueror ruler, say William the Conqueror, through to this sort of more symbolic manifestation of this sort of sublime nobility and royalty and morality and all these sorts of other stuff. The monarch seems to fit in that figure in the constitutional monarchy. And they are sort of untouchable. They're above the daily grind of politics, the quagmire of, and they sit in the place of unquestionable dignity as a result, something to look up to, but never to dirty itself by actually getting involved in anything. So that's interesting. It occupies that figurehead position, that symbolic position, and then you allow the politicians to actually do all the sort of muddy, climbing up the greasy pole stuff, which power-hungry people will do. And you can't have a system which doesn't allow there to be power-hungry people with something to climb up to. You've got to have ambition be rewarded in the society, because otherwise they'll be left with nothing to do, and they'll just start raising fields and killing people. Is what often ends up happening when you get to, say, the Republic, when no one can have too much power. Suddenly you have a situation where people start abusing it. Over time, it tends to unfold and unwind. So I think that the British political system makes good use of ambitions in the democracy. It has the democracy. You have a say. You have a vote. I think democracy is, as people say, the best of a bad bunch of ways of running a society. But I don't know. I think if you don't have that, what do you have? You have some sort of dictatorship, a benevolent dictatorship, a philosopher king, as it were, making all the decisions. The problem is we've seen philosopher kings. We've seen people who had certain ideologies for how the world should be, and given complete control over a country, they proceed to muck it up. They proceed to allow millions of people to die. So I wonder about the idea of a philosopher king, because who is going to be this philosopher king? Who decides who they are? And do they actually have the ability to handle the commitment of a country? I don't know. At least in a democracy, you can say, okay, that person, they're clearly failing at what they're doing. We can kick them out. So that's absolutely fine. So, yeah, I think democracy is a good thing. We probably should stick with the democracy side. And I think this way of doing democracy, which has aspects which are not democratic, I think, like having this queen, you can't remove the queen democratically. She is in a hereditary position. But the point is, by being hereditary, she knows she's hereditary, and she doesn't impose authority. Instead, she's there to serve as a figurehead of the sublime, of some sort of spirit of the country as a whole, which everyone looks up to and respects. And she's done a very good job of representing that by doing very little in terms of politicking, but doing a lot in terms of going around and shaking hands at special events, usually with charities. Very good at that. And opening buildings and ships and other stuff like that. So I would say that that is perhaps the best form of government. It mixes lots of different parts together, which seem sort of contradictory, but actually satisfy all these different needs. And it comes together in this way which I think just seems to be sustainable. It's working so far. And not only is it working so far, I can see why it makes sense in terms of a symbolic way, in terms of this satisfying each of the principles which we actually think are actually important. The principle of, say, freedom came from the Anglo-Saxons. The being able, they actually used to vote in their king, the Anglo-Saxons. It's common law, the freedoms provided in common law. That's the first part. Then you have the sort of a Norman overseeing part, which also comes in, which I find interesting. But that's been relegated to symbolic majesty, as it were, which people look up to. People feel, yes, we have democratic power, but we are not able to decide everything in terms of what the country is. The country exists as something above us. We just simply operate within the country. I think there's something humbling about that, and something which makes people psychologically. It means people don't get too proud of their own democratic capability. I think with a republic, you lack that. You lack that that thing which is great to look up to. I guess the Americans have. They don't do it in the present. They can see the present is a fallible figure. They'd be very critical of the present. All the presidents going back, you criticize they were fallible, but also ahead of the state. So it was an interesting situation where they represented the state. They represented that majesty, but at the same time, they're very much acting foul of that majesty in many different situations. People have that malaise about Trump for that very reason, because he breaks social boundaries while also representing the majesty of the United States. The United Kingdom, we don't have that problem. The king doesn't get the hands grubby in the politics, so they can't run afoul of the majesty. It just works, and it also, I think, does make sense. In these different contradictions coming together, it creates an overall apparatus for, I think, a political functioning and for a political identity. It's a funny one. The British have always been very pragmatic. We've never been very consistent, but I think it's worked. And I know that I would have, when I was younger, devised a perfect system for everything to fit, for everything to, make sense based on certain commonalities, certain rules, like a Bill of Rights, the Constitution. But then I look at what the UK has done, and I think, is that actually going to be a good idea? I'm not sure. I'm humbled by the UK in that respect. I am. And it still has problems. It has problems articulating itself for that very reason. And we need to find ways of working around that. Articulate the underlying principles, our beliefs, our philosophies, making that a bit more coded, I think, a bit more clear for people who haven't grown up steeped in it. I'm a third to fourth generation from immigrants. Everyone from my family immigrated, Jewish family. So I've had the benefit of actually being growing up steeped in it. Also having a taste of, well, not a taste of quite big swallow of the Jewish side as well. So I can see both sides to the story. I think there is something there which needs to be worked on. But overall, I think this is the best political system at the moment, even despite being completely higgledy-piggledy. Right. Question 8. Tell us about the people around you. How can they be characterized? At the moment, no one is around me. I'm on my own on this couch. But I should say that at the moment, I'm living with the family of my mother-in-law to be, with my fiance's family. So they are very different from my actual family. They're a lot more chilled, a lot more laid back in many ways. I say that they can be characterized, I'd say, by a certain down-to-earthness, a certain humility, a certain way of working which is putting in a bit of hard work to do things well, and sort of Delta. My mother-in-law to be is Delta, and my fiance is an Alpha and SEI, so also chimes quite well with aspects of that Delta-ishness, you could say. And yeah, I think the idea is that it's quite a relaxed existence. There's very little conflict, very little shouting. There is it's quite peaceful actually. For the main thing I would say. Yes, whereas I'd say that from the family I was with before, my actual family, is far more intense, far more dramatic at times, more exciting, you could say, as a result. Very, very different lot of people. More critical, more openly critical of things, more like to have arguments, to get things out on the table and have a fight about it. And I usually sort of sit and I provide sort of like the voice of reason for these different debates. And I like helping out. I like helping out to clarify things and calm things down. So yeah, yeah, that's what I think. That's how I characterize the major themes. I could go into the individuals as well, and how they individually might be characterized, but I think we'll be here all night. Probably will be here all night anyway, looking at how long this is going. Sorry, Timur, I apologize. I knew this was going to happen. Right, question 9. Do you have the inner circle people? How is it formed? How it is formed? What kind of people get to your circle? Has it been translated into English from Russian? That's fair enough. So, yes, I have sorts of inner circles for various projects that I do, and the membership of those inner circles can change over time or not. There's very little stability in my circles. I'm not very good at maintaining said circles, but generally what happens is I do something which I like to do. At the moment it's most about socionics. It also can be about politics, and people who are helpful in that, people who share my interests and help me in pursuit of my interests, they tend to hang around more, and I tend to usually in division of certain structures, naturally there can be hierarchies. Like for instance, if in my political stuff there was a committee, so I was chair of a committee, and I had people who were elected to that committee, and I made sure that the people who I thought would be most helpful to actually achieving our aims eventually got elected. And that would have been the inner circle. But as soon as that project was over, I didn't really speak to many people again. Maybe one who was already a friend beforehand. And even then, I'm pretty bad actually still speaking to people unless it is something to do with my interests. I try, it just falls apart. I'm not good at that. I'm not good at thinking about people other than the reason for which the circle was created is maintained. If that's gone, the circle falls apart, and I often forget about talking to the people later. I'm not good at it. But yes, in Socionics, there's actually 2 circles, you could say. There's my moderator circle, which I'm not very good at attending to, unless there's some sort of problem on the group, which I can talk to them more. And also my diagnostic team, who I do also talk to every now and again. I'm not very good at maintaining contact with each of them at the moment, because I've been doing other projects which don't require the diagnostics so much. And sort of been more of a lone person in that respect, but also talking to individuals more as a result for each particular project. But I do like having, for me, I like having circles. I'm not so focused really on maintaining an inner circle for the sake of having an inner circle. It's more useful to have an inner circle, but I find I'd rather have a circle with everyone. I like the World Socionic Society group. It has 2,600 people. I like the fact that everyone can be part of that, and I can talk to anyone there. And there's nothing sort of hiding me from everyone there. I do find that I tend to float aloof above everyone. But when I do want to engage, I like to be able to engage with everyone. So yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of having an inner circle. I don't derive so much pleasure from having the inner circle, but I can see how inner circles do develop. Question 10. Right. Right. Question 10 is this. Have you ever had real friends tell us about them. If not, then what kind of person could you call a real friend? So I'm not sure what a real friend is as opposed to just a friend. I I'm not very good at judging that. I tend to judge who is my friend by who I talk to the most, or who, since the last time I spoke to them, they said something nice to me or positive to me. That's how I'm probably aware they're probably my friend. I'm not good at working out who to trust with things and who not, but then again, I don't usually have a problem with trusting anyway, because I'm usually not disturbed by the idea of something going a bit wrong. Okay, something wrong happens. Okay, I'll just, I'll approach the situation a bit differently next time. I don't feel very vulnerable socially, especially not on the online, on the internet, or even in political environments. I don't feel so socially vulnerable. So what normally happens is someone does something which is unexpected. I know they probably might do the same thing again. I'll probably not give it to them. I'll probably give it to that guy instead, because that guy probably could do it more. Could do it in the way in which I would expect, and that's fine. I don't hold it personally or grudgingly, that sort of stuff. But my real friends, I think, are the people I've hung out with a lot over time. And my problem is that I'm very bad at maintaining that, because as soon as someone starts to act like a real friend, the sort of person where you see them very regularly and they start to expect you to see them regularly, that's when I actually want to sort of get out of it. And I get sort of scared by that. Not scared, that's not the word. I feel restricted by it. I feel restricted by these real friendships. I feel like I can no longer do whatever I find interesting. I have to cater to this garden of real friends. And that can be stressful. Well, stressful. Yes, it's stressful. I think it is stressful. And so I've had real friends. I tend to have trouble with real friends, and I prefer friends of the moment, friends of the situation, friends of the interest. And once the interest is expired, they go back to being friends with like everyone else. And I see everyone else as a friend in potential, rather than these real friends to stick to. My exception to that, I think, is my fiance, who I think is my one real friend in a manageable way. And I say that because she can form a garden which I can tend to for the rest of my life, and I'm okay with that. That's that one. I can have enough energy for that one. I'm not going to do it for anyone else. And I think you've got to be able to do that for one. If you're going to have a productive, satisfactory, and I say productive in more than one way, marriage, I think, yes, you need to be able to have it for one, have enough energy for one. It does take up a lot of time. It does take up time, but you got to be ready to be okay with that, for that one exception. Because if you don't, then you're going to die alone. You're going to be very, very well. Eventually, you won't be able to. Well, you're going to die alone, and you're either going to die without any sort of legacy, any sort of children, or you have lots of bastards, which has its own problems. Um, so yeah, I think, I think this is something which I've managed to navigate reasonably well in the way which works for me, after having had bad knocks in it. And I would say that I do have friends. I do have people who I've helped, people who are now have a certain loyalty to me, and I also try to be loyal to them, but I also try to be helpful towards everyone else as well. I don't find myself, unless someone is going back to said, unless someone is not serving my interests, I find I'm very able to help them as well. And while they're continuing to be helpful towards my interests, while I continue to be interested in them, I'll also remain loyal to them. But it's not like an ongoing loyalty forever and ever and ever. So yeah, I think I do have friends now. I think I could perhaps call them real friends. The question is, what will happen in years to come if I follow the same patterns I've always followed? I don't think I can change. I could try to change, but am I interested enough in changing? I'm not sure. You could always say that you want to change, because we're told by society we should be growing and changing and developing ourselves. Everyone says that. Everyone in the world. If you don't talk about that, you do well in job interviews. But I'm thinking, I don't know how much I will actually be able to change in that respect. I don't think my mind focuses on it naturally, and I think I'll be swimming against the stream to some degree. But I think I do have friends at the moment. I do, and I think I have some good friendships and know some people who are really, um, I think I can achieve things with, people who I can enjoy the company of. I think those are important things in friends. Um, Question 11. Briefly tell us about your outlook or your personal philosophy. Where did it come from? How has it been formed? And what has changed in it over the past 10 years? So, briefly, oh my goodness. So, my outlook, I guess, is my personal philosophy. It's a tricky one. I say it's. Do you mean in terms of political philosophy, in terms of ethos, in terms of metaphysics? In terms of the metaphysics, I think I can play with different models. Each of them are interesting. At the moment, I'm playing the model that reality is information and everything's information metabolism. That's my metaphysical philosophy at the moment. It's not mine, of course. It's just the development of Auschwitz ideas. I like that one. I think it explains quite a lot in terms of and ties lots of different elements together in the same theory: people, society, various things and concepts and feelings and structures and facts and all sorts of other stuff like that. It ties a lot together. So I think that's one of the best philosophies of a metaphysical nature. And of a more political philosophy, my political way of thinking, how I say political in terms of morality as well, but political suggests moral as well. I'm leaning far. Oh no, I'm saying I'm leaning. I'm very much a conservative, but I'm an unusual conservative. In that I'm a intellectually curious conservative, and there are intellectually curious conservatives, but the trends are the people more conscientious and low openness who are more conservative, and people more liberal, but more progressive, you could say, tend to be more intellectually open, but also far less conscientious. So I've got aspects of this liberal way of thinking in the more conservatively minded person. I say liberal. I am also reasonably liberal, not a progressive, and that's where I think you can't be a conservative and be a progressive. You can be a conservative and rather liberal, but I don't think you can be a conservative and a progressive. I don't think I'm a progressive. I think on balance, while I'm open to new things and new developments, I like that being an organic growth. What I don't tend to think is a good idea is what I've seen be a bad idea, is where people take one line of progress and push society forward on that one line of progress, as this is the outcome, this is the utopia to push towards. Because I think it can often lead to death, lots and lots of death everywhere. So I think instead, I prefer conservatism. I think change happening where it's organic for people, where people are ready with. I think that's good. I think a conservation of freedoms is also important, not abandoning freedoms for the sake of the progress, because progress can be very authoritarian at times. I think hanging on to the freedom, not knowing what they are, crystallizing it in common law, I think is a very important part for a personal, for a political aspect of philosophy. And I think in terms of how the individual relates to society as part of that personal philosophy, I think it's a question of, well, I think it's a question of knowing that your own good is best achieved through doing good things for other people around you, having friendships, having positive regard, having a positive, be positively seen by other people. I think that helps you a lot. So people will be stepping in to help you when you have trouble. So I've gone through major philosophical transformation over the last 10 years, since I was about 18, even before when I was 16, where I went through a period where I had great trouble with conventional morality. I questioned a lot of it. I wasn't sure what was right, what was wrong, because everything seemed to be hypocritical. Nothing seemed to make consistent sense. I didn't like that it was hypocritical. I didn't like that it didn't make consistent sense. I didn't like there were all these exceptions. I didn't like that nothing seemed to make internal logical sense. No one could explain to me why something was good and why something was bad. It just was. and it seemed just all sort of emotional stuff, and it seemed to be holding people back from doing what they really wanted a lot of the time, which I also didn't like. So I went through periods and transformations of actually becoming more of some sort of egoistic anarchist. I went very Max Stirnerian, as it were, although I was quite a pitiful anarchic egoist, because I'm not sure I would actually survive very well in such an environment. But I did think of those ideas being perhaps the best ideas at the time, because I couldn't see a good rationale for the conventional, traditional morality we actually have around us at the moment. And it's only over time that I managed to find my peace with that. I managed to find my peace with the idea that there are social mores, and that morality is put together. It's not about personal right or wrong. You're never going to make sense of everything just by what each individual thinks is good or bad. You're not going to get anywhere. You just have to manage that and not get into trouble with people as a result. But what you can get is a sense of these social mores, these cultural norms which have evolved over time, these certain expectations and ways of viewing the world, this shared schema. Because working together in a society maximizes your chances for survival far better than going out alone. And we've evolved to be a eusocial species. There's a reason for that. We're not those octopodians who live their life alone, have sex, and then die of it. We've formed our society, all the things which we know, all the things which we can do, all the things which we can explore in our society is through that idea of being a society, people coming together and sharing ideas and insights and finding out new things about each other. And when you learn something, you can pass on to someone else and they can try it out as well. So that's why I think that you need a morality, certain shared rules, so you can operate together, so you can work together, so that you don't murder someone in their bed the next night just because you feel like it. That sort of stuff. You need that shared understanding. Otherwise, you can't work together. You can't trust each other. You can't share your ideas with each other, and you can't build a society together. So yeah, that's how I've made my peace of it, and now I understand it, and I see it as, at the end of the day, when I say what's in it for me, as well as what's in it for me, I see what's in it for me. I'm actually benefited by contributing to society, by being part of it. And I feel better as a result, because I had this idea, but I didn't know why things were in it. Because if I didn't know what was in it for me, then why do all this all the social stuff and feel good? And I used to stand out from society. I used to be a bit of a sort of um, I was playing Dungeons and Dragons as chaotic evil, you could say, and I wasn't actually happy from it. I was getting rejected from events because really I wanted to belong, and I just hadn't figured out that I wanted to belong, because I also wanted to be different, wanted to be special, wanted to be appreciated for doing something different. So I wanted to belong while also having some sort of special role to play in that belonging. And I was trying to navigate that. And I thought, well, maybe I can just be special on my own. No, it doesn't bring happiness. What brings happiness is being a positive contributor and finding the way to be a positive contributor while also doing where you don't feel as if you're sacrificing what makes you interesting. So that was the challenge of working at, finding a political philosophy which was aligned to that. It took me a few years to work out, to go on that sort of journey, and now it makes sense to me. But by going through this sort of roundabout way, it means that fly, go away. So what that means to me is that I've got a very weird way of looking at morality, looking at sort of the darker and worse aspects of people. I'm very understanding of it because I've put my head there in the past, and I've considered those ways of thinking. I know where it comes from. So I've worked out morality from a very sort of roundabout, logical, intellectual route, rather than sort of being born with this desire just to fit in and understand these sorts of social norms immediately. I had to work it out for myself. So that's my transformation, how it's changed over 10 years. I should say, yeah, it's conservative. I was just also to say with the liberal aspects of conservatism, so preserving liberal freedoms like freedom of speech, preserving freedom of the press, where, except what I've talked about before, where it can be overdone. Free economy, freer markets, I think creates economic growth, makes people happier. I think that's something which we should be preserving, rather than controlling the economy too much. And also, I would say a sense of a nation state. I'm actually more of a nationalist than a globalist. I think that globalism has some great benefits, but also it hasn't been able to articulate a global identity yet. And I think in terms of a nation to actually rework, you need a sense of identity, you need a sense of clarified, not even clarified, can just be embodied credos and codes. I don't think the embodied credos or codes of one country are just going to gel with that of another. There are huge cultural differences between different groups of people. And we need to navigate that if we're going to forge a global identity. So for the time being, I think national identity makes more sense. And we can see us going towards that in terms of the Brexit vote, in terms of even the election of Donald Trump, as an example, is more nationalistic. Now, I'm just making clear that I'm not one of the ethnic nationhood. I myself will not fit into any sort of ethnic nationhood. Jewish people don't tend to fit into ethnic nationhoods very well. But what I do think is a sense of civic nationhood, that people can see the nation state as an important thing, something to work towards, that embodies society which we're working towards, and that helps the individual by being part of that society. A society which protects people's freedoms, a society which respects people's freedoms and enables them to grow and develop in that society. And the idea that by coming here, we're taking that on board and we're working together towards that particular goal of maintaining that sort of free society. So it's a weird combination of both liberal and also more conservative beliefs, as it were, which I find with me. And I think it's relatively consistent, but it's composed of different parts coming together to create a synergy. Yeah, okay. So, question 12. Right. In your opinion, what is the key to successful performance if it is A, a scientific report, and B, a performance by a musician? So, a scientific report. I think this is, well, to do a good scientific report, you need to have something which is closely backed up by the data. It needs to be something which clearly shows the methodology used, and that methodology is replicable. It needs to be something which then is able to be peer reviewed as a result. Pass peer review, very important. Oh, I think Cat's got to go. Bye, Cat. And yes, so scientific report needs to be replicable, needs to be very clearly setting out its methodology so that it is replicable. It needs to have a very good methodology, a good sample size. It needs to have shown how it's worked for any sort of potential biases or potential pitfalls that could happen in the methodology, account for those, be open about where those might be. So these sorts of things make a good scientific report. And then if you're lucky at the end of all that, you have statistically significant results of an effect size worth clapping about. And therefore it feels another little brick in the overall wall of the scientific literature. So that's what I think is a key to successful performance in a scientific report. And the reason I think that's what, if you ask any person with scientific training, they'll say that is what makes a good scientific report. So now I get to a performance by a musician. Very, very different. So a performance by a musician. Why do people go to see music? They go to see music to have a sense of sublime auditory beauty from sound. Sound arranged in a certain way through certain notes, gradations in tone to create an overall effect which is emotionally moving. So a performance by a musician, it needs to play enough of the notes correctly so that you recognize the tune. That's important. It needs to play it with certain verve, with certain vivacity, certain a sense of showmanship, a way which, and also finding the right notes, finding the right tones, the right levels of softness, the right levels of harshness to convey the mood and message of the music to the audience. So the audience is uplifted, so that the audience feels that they are carried away from whatever they're doing in the day-to-day to some sort of sublime music, some sort of sublime experience, which makes them not even notice they're even in the room that particular moment. And they're just in the sense of beauty. They're just immersed in it. They're just taking in, enjoying it for what it is. That is what I think a performance by a musician is successful can do. But it can give you that that sense of harmony and beauty in terms of its note structure, and really convey that, to bring that to life. Because at the moment, music is just written on the pages, on the manuscript. You've got to bring that to life. You've got to know how to bring that to life through your performance, through the way in which you pluck your strings with your fingers, or blow your flute, whatever it is, to create that overall effect. And it's not precise. You can't do it precisely. It's something which, if you got that knack, you can just do. And it has the most amazing affect for people. Not so much effect, affect. It's people emotionally taken away from it later. That's important. So next, we go to question 13. What skills or qualities have you been brought up by your What have you been brought up by your parents? What skills or qualities have you been brought up by your parents to have? I think that's what it means. What are the most important skills or qualities which are necessary for children, in your opinion? Okay, so I think the most important thing, if I had to choose one thing which is important to instill in a child, it's when you explain why not to do things or to do things, you explain why. You tell people why. That's what frustrated me as a child, when people didn't tell me why things were bad, things were good. I think that's important. You got to level with your kid. You got to have a conversation with them about why, so they understand why. If you do that, they're less likely to then do the thing which is bad in the first place, because reverse psychology always kicks in. If you don't understand why, then you're going to try it out. Of course you are. You're not going to respect just because you're told it. So, yeah, I think that's the important skill or quality necessary for a child. It's knowing the why. Make sure your kid knows the why. I think there are other things you can teach kids, of course, but in general, teaching kids how to not die at a young age, and how to have a family, and to reproduce and keep the gene continuing. Yeah, in general, that's what parenting is all about. But I think everyone gets that. But I think that's the important message: the why. What skills or qualities have you been brought up with by your parents? My parents didn't. I mean, I guess they did teach me skills. I wouldn't really know how to go to the toilet if they didn't. But I think a lot of my learning I sort of did away from my parents. Some in school, and then no, I think learning through on the internet, learning online, reading. I think a lot what my parents did was sort of nurtured my talents, encouraged what they perceived to be my gifts. I think that is what my parents did. But in terms of the instructional side, I mean, I was taught some things. My dad more so, say how to do the washing up, how to manage day-to-day chores, how to think critically, how to plan ahead. Those sorts of things that my dad taught me, I suppose. But I also had leanings that way anyway, and it wasn't so much of instruction. I wasn't sure that I wouldn't say that I learned very easily under his tutelage. I thought I learned better when I sort of saw a need and learn things myself. So yeah, that's how I'd answer that question. Not the best answer, but yeah. Question 14. Comment on the expression "might is right." Do you share it, and why? So I used to think that was what made sense, because I couldn't find a good rationale for anything else. But that seemed to at least make its own internal sense. But now I have a more nuanced view on might is right. So I think a better way to look at this is that you could take the sort of local view that might is right, where someone who has the most strength or power is the authority. They basically make everything what they say goes. And that seems to be okay for the short term. It never works in the long term, because you can never be sure that you command the most resources in that moment. Something's going to go wrong. And when it does go wrong, when someone else acquires more resources than you, or someone bigger is out there, then starts imposing on you, everything you said was right, then becomes wrong. So eventually it leads to contradiction. So instead, I'd say that might is right could make sense, but it's not the might of an individual. It's not the might of a person just imposing their view, because that's all very much limited in time and space. Instead, I say that the might that is right is the might of nature, what nature can enforce. just simply by being. That is what I think is the might. And so the might of the natural laws, the might of, for instance, gravity, that's a might. It's a force. We call it a force. I mean, that's always right. Things fall down to the ground. I think if you start to view might as right in that sort of way, where things end up happening, I think that's probably the better way of doing it, rather than just talking about individuals just imposing their authority on other people. But I think there's something to learn from this in terms of systems which aren't might versus right. Might is right. The system we live in now, democracy, is an example of that. That's where we've taken away the ability of tyrants to tell everyone what to do, which I think is beneficial. People are happy because not everyone can be a tyrant. Not everyone can be a big bossy person. And to prevent those sorts of hierarchies developing in society, instead, people are on more of a level playing field with their, at least in their political rights, not in terms of merits, of course, in terms of what achievement they can make for themselves. And what we can learn from this, though, is that you can't have certain rights. You can't have certain. But what you need to learn from might is right. It's not that right is might. That's the important thing. Right is not might. That is what people often assume nowadays, and it's not the case. You can't just come up with certain rights, certain principles, certain this, certain that, and just assume that that's going to become reality because you said so. You need to have a way of enforcing that. You need to have a way of making sure that's the case. Rules are just what one would call nonsense on stilts, unless they're actually maintained either naturally in nature, or they are enforced by that order creating person. So yeah, law requires law enforcement to some degree for that right to become might, or it needs to be fostered through agreement between people. It needs to be fostered through agreement between people so people can actually agree on what they're actually doing, and they're not going to break their word later, because there are consequences. You need consequences. Right requires consequences. So yeah, I think, so what I'd say about might is right, I don't agree with it in the way people often think. I think there is a more general, more natural way of thinking of might is right, which does make sense, which isn't what was initially conceived by Max Stirner, I should say. And I also think that we could still learn from the idea, so we don't fall down the other way of going towards right is might. Now, question 15. How do you define a close person to you or not? If someone's close to you or not? In what cases do you stop communicating with a person you consider close? I think I sort of answered this already, but I would say a close person to me is someone who I talk to a lot at the moment. I think that's what I'd say. I feel as if I could become close to almost anyone if there was an interest in doing so. I don't really feel I don't feel that closeness beyond how often we talk to one another, and if I enjoy those experiences. If I have enjoyable experiences with someone a lot in a period, I think I'm probably close to them. And if I know more stuff about them, I think that could also help me say I'm close to them. But I can find out stuff about people who are complete strangers as well. I do my interviews, I find out all about people. And I guess in those moments, in that moment, I'm talking to that person, I'm probably closer to that person I'm interviewing, closer than almost anyone else, except perhaps my fiance, because she has to occupy a position in my head where she is the closest for that relationship to work, for that to make sense. But yeah, so it's difficult for me to define a close person to me. It's the person who I'm talking to. That's it, the closest I'm talking to and trying to relate to. And that can change from one moment to the next. In what cases do you stop communicating with a person you consider close? No. It's the other way around. I don't consider them close when I stop communicating with them. That's how I feel it is to me. If I haven't talked to someone in months, then they're probably no longer close. They're no longer on my mind. They're thinking about other people. But at the same time, I'd say that if someone sort of hangs around longer than there is an interest, then I start trying to push them away a bit, because I then find it a bit too stagnant. It becomes a bit too mollycoddling, restricting, as it becomes that sort of real friend, which can often be off-putting to me. And yes, so I'm not really good at sort of maintaining closeness with people. I'm as long as there's something useful or interesting which they're doing, then I can, because then there's some reason for it. But otherwise, I find it difficult. Um, yes, I don't proactively stop communicating. I just sort of forget. That's another thing. I forget to talk to people. I don't decide I'm not going to talk to this person. I find it's such an unnatural thing to do for me. Because as soon as I'm interested in saying something or talking or sharing something with them in particular, because they got certain qualities which I know, because I've gotten to know them, but I know they could benefit me in some way by talking to them, then I'll talk to them straight out. I talk to them straight away. So it's, yeah, no, I don't just cut off contact. I don't create a barrier like that. That's not the sort of thing I do. Except when my fiance has seen someone strange add me on Facebook, who starts sending me, "Oh, hey, cutie, how you doing?" And when she sees that, then Zara says, "Oh, I don't know who that is. Why you got them as a friend?" Then I can block them. I can block that person. That's because she said so, not because I've said so. And that's okay. I'm happy with her taking control of that for me because I don't really need to think about it. 16. What do you think will happen to humanity in the 21st century? I've pretty much talked about this. I mean, okay, I've talked about the West. I haven't talked about the East. I imagine that the West will eventually conquer the East in this big global dictatorship, or there'll be some sort of massive war between the Empire of America and China. At least if Oswald Spengler makes any sense. And I imagine America may win through. Maybe China will win through. I don't know. I do not know. I'm not sure. But that's why I think if you follow along those railroad, that way of predicting, that may happen. If not, I just think, yeah, internet uniting everyone, one big sort of global singularity thing. Maybe. So, question 17. In your opinion, how did life appear on planet Earth? How did the man appear? So, in my opinion, we have different theories. So, I think the scientific evidence is suggesting that life is, well, if you look at life, it sort of is a code. It's a genetic code, and it with certain phenotypes. And genetic code is a very sort of complexly oriented arrangement of proteins to create certain effects, which we can't really entirely calculate up, and so we call it life. It moves. It does certain qualities. We haven't been able to completely calculate the genome of a human being yet. We're working on it, but there's a very complicated arrangement of proteins. So how did life appear? Well, these complicated self-replicating arranged of proteins sort of added bits on, lost little bits through a series of mutations and changes to eventually, whatever seemed to actually not die off, whatever was able to maintain itself sustainably and replicate itself over time, making changes as situations changed, as challenges changed, to become what we are today. I think that's how life appeared and how man eventually appeared. This sort of self-replicating, self-mutating, very hyper-complex arrangement of proteins with certain epigenetics and genetics. So yeah, that's how I think life appeared. I think that makes sense. I also think that you could use religious or theology to explain in a more symbolic way how man appeared and what man means, because you can explain the mechanics fine with the science, but to actually get a map of what it actually means, to get a sense of a why behind the what, I think religion can be helpful as a map, and mythology can be helpful in that respect. And you can pick whichever mythology you want. Some mythologies seem to have more weight than others in shaping our ideas. So this sort of Judeo-Christian view of the Bible that man was made in the image of God, that's important. The idea that man was created to represent but not actually be the divine. It has a spark of a divine. It has a look of a divine. And the image of God, well, because God creates and man also creates. That's important. It lets us recognize our place. And so I think it's good to consider both the religious and the scientific accounts for how life appeared on Earth. One is factual, the other one is more spiritual and metaphysical. but a bit more. Yeah, it is well, not metaphysical. It's a degree of deontological, I'd say. Explain why we should be doing stuff. So I think it's good to consider both. I don't want to just limit myself to one or another. I mean, I know I believe in one context, and the other context I think provides meaningful insights as well. Um, Question 18. Do you believe in supernatural phenomena, the evil eye, curses? Why? So I think there is probably some reason why people hold these supernatural phenomena to be true. I don't. I am open to these phenomena existing, and but I do have trouble with the idea of the supernatural. And I say that not because I don't think stuff like evil eye and curses can't exist. I think there may be something behind them which people have seen working, something we can't explain yet why these exist. But I have trouble with the idea that something, except for the symbolic, which we've already described, something which has symbolic meaning to people, this idea that something which is still of this mortal plane in some way, but still existing above nature, beyond explanation. I have trouble with that sort of mid territory. I'm okay with the supernatural. I'm okay with the natural. When it comes to the supernatural, it's somewhere in between. It's just a sort of unexplained territory, tales of the unexpected, you could say. And I'd say in that there's just something there, probably that we don't yet understand, and that we'd like to understand and find out more. So I find it interesting. Areas for further exploration, further discovery. I don't think it's something which we can just, what's the word? I say we should remain skeptical towards not believe everything we're told about this, but we should also remain open. We need to have an open and tolerant skepticism of these sorts of ideas, because people do believe it. And also, an important fact, belief can create a reality. People who are cursed by a witch doctor, if they believe in the potency of that curse, could actually die from that curse because of the psychological ramifications, if not the curse actually existing as some sort of thing. So we need to pay these ideas with a bit of respect, but we should also be skeptical and not just run away with them and just believe in it ourselves. Question 19. Okay, situation. A burglar is trying to break into your house. You are inside. What will the actions be? So what immediately comes to mind is basically stick your head out the window and offer them a cup of tea. I think that's going to stop them breaking into your house pretty quickly. If not, you can always make sure that you're hiding a baseball bat behind your behind your back, so you can whack them over the head if they still decide to persist. But I find that the best thing to do with a burglar is to give them a reaction they're not expecting, because then they don't quite know what to do. It's not to threaten them immediately, because they can go to reaction and they could pull out something dangerous. No, bamboozle them. Offer them a cup of eating that. They might just stop what they're doing for a second, and then you can do whatever you want once you make them suggestible. That's how hypnotists do. Actually, they do something unexpected, and then when you're trying to figure out what's going on, then they can get you to do other things. So offer them a cup of tea. I think that's a friendly thing to do anyway. And yeah, they won't be breaking into your house once that's happened. Question 20. Tell us about 1 to 3 famous or outstanding people you like. You can cite modern historical figures or fictional characters. Explain your choice. Do you have anything in common with these people? So let me start with Albert Einstein. So I've always looked up to Albert Einstein. I don't agree with his political views. He's more of a socialist. I'm more of a capitalist or conservative. But I relate to the idea of this sort of, young Jewish boy underachieving in school who had different ideas, was very open to different things, had his own mind, and came up with different theories which he can then discuss with other people in different environments, and was able to achieve a public recognition for the ideas which he'd thought up, and to be able to discuss those in public and be known for them. And that's sort of the ideal for me as well. And also things to learn from in terms of his, how badly his personal relationships went, making sure that I marry the right person, so I don't have any of that stress later on. I've learned from Albert Einstein, as well as admired what he's managed to achieve. Yes, another one is Margaret Thatcher. Very different to me. I'd say I've lots of personality-wise in common with Albert Einstein. I have very little personality-wise with Margaret Thatcher. I know she's very different to me, and she's probably quite a scary person. But I admire that she had an idea what she thought was right, and she defied expectations. That's what I like. Albert Einstein also defied expectations. There are people that think he'd amount to very much, but Margaret Thatcher defied expectations. This woman entering into becoming the prime minister in a conservative government, not a socialist progressive government. Everyone expects that, but it's actually unexpected that they haven't achieved that yet in the Labour Party in the UK. But in the Conservative Party, electing a woman to run them, and a woman of outstanding tenacity and nerve, and that ability just to look a problem right in the face and just act. I find that's quite an interesting, refreshing way of viewing things. It's very different to me, and I probably wouldn't get on with her very well in the close one-to-one, but I do sort of respect it because she showed that sort of no nonsense, which I think a lot of conservatives now don't have. There's certain a tendency to bow towards public opinion when it turns against you. It could be a certain weakness in that, where you have certain principles, but you want to hide what you actually believe to make something a bit more politically correct, because otherwise you'll be held up by the you'll be lynched by the media, as it were. And I know Margaret Thatcher, someone who just did not care about that. She went by what she believed, what she thought was right, and she's remembered for good or for ill by the country. So yeah, I like what she was able to do and to defy those expectations. Yeah, but yeah, not like me, but well, a conservative like me. Right. Let's see. Another. So a third one, I guess I should say. I like to say Pliny the Elder. Yes, let's go back in time to Pliny the Elder. So I like Pliny the Elder because in a time in during the Roman Empire when you had these despotic dictators, you just had Nero. He just got he gone and had Vespasian taking over and doing all sorts of. He wasn't nearly as bad as Nero, of course, but he's still a dictator and he still did horrible things to the Jewish people. You had Pliny the Elder investigating and finding out about various natural phenomena and recording it in his encyclopedias. And just his idea of this sort of quite benevolent fellow, quite likes to have intellectual discussions at his home. He also went to help out with the whole Mount Vesuvius eruption. He ended up having an asthma attack and dying, unfortunately. But just thinking, I could have before the whole eruption, of course. But I could have, if I'd like to live during this horrible time in Roman history, had all these dictators, and the Roman Republic was in ruins. There's no republic left, no freedom anymore, and have someone who, you could just go to someone's house like that and have interesting discussions. I kind of like that. I sort of I kind of like that Pliny the Elder as a figure in Roman history. In otherwise quite sordid litany of characters, you could say. But I don't know. Actually, I like Pliny. I also like Cicero. He's quite cool. But Pliny, I think, at least for what comes to mind. Question 21. How do you like spending your free time and why? Doing videos like this. No, I like looking up different stuff and finding out different things, like playing video games. I like engaging in socionics discussions and typing people interviews. And over time, I've become more able to do things constructive, where I used to do things which were purely leisure-based. Even now, I still do things with purely leisure-based, like playing computer games, which I enjoy, and watching TV, watching anime, sharing experiences I like with my fiance, like watching TV shows which I've already seen, but I want her to experience. I can live vicariously through her. I enjoy doing that. All sorts of activities. Yeah. Lots of stuff. Question 22. Tell us about the country in which you would like to live. Explain your choice. What do you like and dislike in country of residence? So, the country I would like to live is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That is a country which I would like to live. I'm very happy where I am. I don't plan on moving anywhere else. I'm a proud Brit. And so, yeah, my choice, I think in general, we should live in the country which we most want to live in. I'm happy to be in this country. This is a country where I was born, where I grew up. I've got an understanding of what it's about. I can also see where I'd also like to help it in the future, and what I can do to contribute maybe to that. So, yeah, no, with a great history, with a working political system, an open freedom of speech has existed. Um, I love the humour, the culture of the Brits, and it is embodied. It isn't something which almost needs to be articulated. It hasn't felt the need to articulate, and I like it hadn't really needed to articulate. People just know, but also there's a need to do that now. I think to articulate what being British is about. People understand, and so that people can then become more British and understand that and take that on board to help people like my great grandparents, for instance, who would have immigrated and may have felt ill at odds. Used to start off with. Let's see. Question 23. Right. I think it gets to the picture round. For each of three pictures, give detailed statements and thoughts. What you see in the picture, what in your opinion, is the main idea of the author. Let's start with this one. So that looks like someone who, if I had asked out, would have been quite creeped out by the idea at school. Looks sort of serious. Looks sort of, I'm not sure if she's quite gentle or quite formidable. Could be either. But there's there's like a piercing look in those eyes, and one of assessment of character almost. I don't know. I feel a little bit. Maybe it's like she's judging me. I'm not sure. She's got a good hairstyle though. That's pretty cool. Looks like a bee's nest almost. Nice flowers, and yes, looks like something out of the. I'm going to say the 18th century. I'm thinking 18th century, maybe late 18th century, or maybe just before it got all wiggy. Yeah, it could be the end of the 17th or the end of the 18th. One of those. No, I think it's end of the. No, I think it's late 18th century or very beginning of the 19th. Yes. This scene. Oh, this is more interesting. I like this one. So this is chaotic. Oh, stuff happening. There's fire. There's brimstone. It looks like the right. So this is almost a biblical scene. This is God is angry. God is angry, and these people can see that he's angry, and they've been doing naughty stuff. What are they doing over there? What are they doing? They are taking something. They are ransacking something. They're taking something out of some sort of religious place. What is this religious place? Some sort of temple. They are taking something out of the temple. They are ransacking it. They're taking good jewels and gold, things that should be there, out. There is a woman on the ground. She's got a baby on her. She got her boobs out as well. She may have been ravished or something like that. People are then looking up at the sky. The God is angry. Lightning strikes and fire rains down. Now look, lightning can strike things, right? Fair enough. But it struck a statue representing something. Something good has been corrupted and therefore must be destroyed. Some ideal has been destroyed. Something has been breached. And so the statue representing has been struck by the lightning. And it's not often you see fire raining down from the sky. Even if the lightning strikes, fire raining down from the sky is a pretty good sign that God is angry. Okay, so that's what's happened. Right. This picture. Oh, I like this one more. It's a bit less intense than the other one. So that is good. So this is a hunter. This guy just hunted some fowl, some game, some ducks, some rabbit, and they're having some sort of He's telling some sort of story, clearly. The dog is doing some sort of poo or some sort of fart, I'm not sure what, and they are listening to the story. He's finding it sort of bamboozling. He's like lighting a cigarette and about to ask a pertinent question about the story being asked, or being told. Like, this is a very sort of looks like a fun scene to be in. I wouldn't mind sitting there. I wouldn't mind, being, I don't know, listening to this story, whatever it is. Yes. Um, oh, this is a symbolic painting, clearly. So here we have a bench where two people are next to each other. Something about love, something about relationships, but on thin rope or string between the wings of aircraft. That is a very dangerous situation. They're probably going to die at some point because the planes can't fly next to each other so consistently. Something's going to snap. People are going to fall to their death below the clouds. I think this is about the fragility of love and relationships, almost and that it's so in the slightest false step, and people could break up with you. People could you could lose them forever, and it can be very traumatic and stuff like that. I think this is what this is talking about, and that is a beautiful scene. If you just take this part here in the middle, right, it looks like a beautiful scene. People watching the sunset together, lovely, lovely, lovely. But then when you see these parts, you think, there's something which they're not seeing. Perhaps, maybe they do see it. I don't know. Something they're not seeing, which actually poses real danger. Maybe. Interesting. Interesting painting. So this one, okay, they're ships. They are Dutch ships. So something to do with trading and commerce. The Dutch were very much about trading commerce in the 18th century. This is a Dutch ship, probably a merchant vessel, perhaps. And there is a storm. Well, no, there's not a storm. No, it doesn't have to be a storm. Yes, no, dark clouds. It probably is a storm and very violent waters. And there are rocks. And something is. What is this? Something's washed aboard. Is that a sword? Is it a gun? I think it's a sword. Oh, it's a very stiff willy. No, I think it's a sword. No, it's not. Hang on. There's a flag on the end. That is no. A ship has sunk. A ship has struck the rocks and sunk, and that is the top. That just like that on the top of there. That is like that, and that's sunk beneath the waves. So a storm has disrupted a Dutch merchant vessel. I assume they're merchants. I think I'm just being racist towards Dutch people. I assume when I see a Dutch ship, it must be something to do with commerce, right? Ooh, black shadows. We immediately know that's something sinister. What else could it be? It's interesting. The black shadow, right, going up the stairs, it doesn't actually cast a shadow. That's interesting. What does that tell you? That means that that thing is not real. It's not. Well, it's not concrete. It's not. There's not someone pulling a black flag across the stairway. Instead, what this is a supposed supernatural. This is something which is breaking the normal laws of physics. Otherwise, you see it casting a shadow. So it's going up the stairs or it's going down the stairs. I'm not sure. You can't really tell in this. And you can see streaks going one way, but also going the other way. Maybe they're two different black shadows going in opposite directions. One up the stairway, one down the stairway. Either way, this black shadow seems to be traveling somewhere, because it gives the impression of movement, or maybe it's just a rather strong wind blowing on it. Nevertheless, if it is supernatural, you can assume that means that, well, if it's supernatural, right, because it hasn't cast a shadow, and it's black, we know that black means bad. Black is bad. People always say black is bad and white is good. So this is a black shadow thing, which means to do bad of some nature. And it seems to be moving. So it's moving to do bad to someone somewhere. Where? I don't know. Is it up the stairs? Is it down the stairs? It's going towards something or someone. Now, these sorts of stairs, you can see them often on, if you go into sort of nice apartment buildings, nicer ones, not the nasty ones. Perhaps you can see stairs like this, quite ornate decoration. So maybe it's entered someone's I don't know, it's been called by some sort of sorcerer to someone's to enter into someone's sort of flat and, I don't know, possess them or something like that. Or maybe it's a demon, maybe it's been summoned somewhere and it's going to take them over and do bad things. I'm not sure what, something bad because it's black and it's clearly supernatural because there's no shadow. So yes, this is a sinister. This is a sinister thing, whatever's in this image. Ah, but this is not sinister. No, as you can see, white. White is light. White is good. And this is, again, something supernatural. Something which doesn't quite make sense. It's levitating. It's floating in midair. Gravity is not working now. For before, light was not registering. It was just passing through the seemingly solid thing. That means it was not real. But this, again, can't be real because it's floating. It's floating, it's levitating. That doesn't make any sense. It is, again, supernatural, but because it's white, we know it is good, not bad. So, what is it? Well, what is it housed within? It's housed within some sort of weird palm tree. Very weird. I haven't seen a palm tree like that. It's a weird tree. It is a weird tree that has combinations of facets of other trees. So that suggests to me it's a big tree. It has combinations of facets of other trees. That suggests to me it's meant to represent trees in general, and maybe not even trees in general. Life itself, the symbol of the tree of life. This is what it's meant to be, the tree of life. And what it houses within here, this pulsating white mass of some sort of complex cellular structure, almost like a brain within. This is some sort of sentient life force, whatever that is. Some sort of sentient supernatural life force. It makes me think of Avatar, you know, where the sort of you go to the trees and the trees are connected with some sort of intelligence which guides all of nature. It is something like that, some sort of nature, hive mind, intelligence, supernatural creator, benevolent being, which is the source and driving force of all life on this said place or planet, or whatever else it is. That is what this thing is, I think. Either that or someone's doing some very cool light tricks. Right. Oh, this is someone with their hand on their lip like that. They are chewing their finger. So this is a guy, right, with jaundice who is biting his nails. He's learned some very bad habits in school. I think that's what it is. Or potentially it is a guy who is experiencing fear, because you could also do that when you're scared. So I think that maybe this is a guy experiencing fear or doubt or regret or worry or some sort of other negative emotion, neuroticism that is more withdrawn than volatile. So fear, anxiety, regret. I think that is probably what it is. In the dark, in the shadow, a place of isolation from others and contemplation on isolation. So that's what it could be. Either a jaundiced fellow biting his finger or some sort of portrayal of regret or anxiety or fear or dread even. Right. This picture. So here we have a social gathering. It is a very 19th century social gathering. There are portraits, there are paintings, there's a clock that seems a little bit awkward, interesting, a bit higgledy-piggledy. She's sitting in a, again, no, I guess she's sitting all right for that chair. There's a rather, it would be quite an uncomfortable chair to sit in, I think. I'm not sure. Don't know, my mum would complain about her back sitting in that chair, I think. Yeah, there's a fellow leaning on the back, talking. There, clearly, the main focus seems to be everyone is looking at this fellow here with this document. What is he doing? What is he reading? Everyone's interested in what this document has to say. And the people in this, they seem connected somewhere of various different ages. This isn't necessarily a social gathering. These are different people, different ages, but all connected about this one document. Why this one document? So I think the most likely explanation, given this distinguished looking fellow here with glasses is actually reading it, is making sense of this document, this paper, and everyone's listening expectantly to what's being said. Some people are elderly, some people are younger. This to me seems like relatives of a family. These are different people in the family, relatives. not necessarily all in the same family. It could be cousins, could be brothers, sisters, uncles, whatever else it is. And they are listening to the reading of a will of a recently departed. I think that's what it is. It's interesting. In the curtain here, is that black or is it red? If it's black, it could be about a recent death, covering that for mourning. Then they would also be cut, but maybe not, because this mirror is also not covered. But maybe that's also, no, that's, to be fair, it's not a Jewish family, so that's fine. Yeah, they're a Christian family, so most likely, probably not Jewish, probably not covering up windows, so covering up mirrors, which often happens in people sitting shiver. But no, I think there's been the death. There's been the death, and someone's reading the will, and the relatives are trying to find out what are they going to get. Maybe. Could be other explanations as well, but that seems to strike me. It could be, alternatively, the plot of, say, Cluedo, and there's been a murder. Oh, again, a death. There's been also a death. But no, there's some sort of mystery, right? And this guy here is reading some note left behind by the, I don't know, again, by the deceased. Why does it always go back to the deceased? Or by the murderer, perhaps, a letter, and they're all trying to figure out what it actually means. But no, I think what's more likely is they're listening to the reading of a will. That seems to make sense from the various age disparities, but they're all connected around this particular document. I think that's the major time when that sort of thing happens. Okay, yeah, anything else? Oh, another picture. Oh, it looks like a murder is afoot. Not the murder of a previous example, not that perhaps potential murder, but this, a murder of crows. A murder of crows. And I'm not sure what that stuff is, that membrane is behind them. No clue. These are crows, and they are a little bit raggedy, crows, sort of looking at each other. Not sure. Not sure, but I know it's a murder of crows. The question is, why are they murders of crows? What do crows represent? Oh, are they necessarily even crows? Maybe they're ravens instead. Now, ravens, they represent the afterlife. They can be psychopomps in Norse mythology, and they represent also wisdom as well. So maybe there are different reasons why these crows or these ravens are being portrayed, or maybe there's something quite dark and gloomy and sinister about it as well, a dark foreboding perhaps, depending on how you interpret crows or ravens. I'm not sure if they're ravens. I need to listen to their core to work it out. Maybe their beaks are more raven beaks, but I don't know. I need to look it up again. Yeah, so that's a murder of crows or ravens. A bit of impressionism. That looks nice. So this is a building. I wonder if it's the maybe it's actually the Thames, and maybe there's the Houses of Parliament. I'm not sure. Let me see. I think it may be the Houses of Parliament with Big Ben, but I may be unsure. Let me take a look. You know what? I think it is. Yep, I think it is. I think that is. There's not Big Ben, but it looks to me like the Houses of Parliament over the Thames River with the sunset. This was painted. I wonder who painted this. It does seem like Impressionism. Not sure. Correct. No, maybe it's Expressionism. I just don't know my art properly. You know what? I think actually it's no, I think it's Impressionism. It's definitely Impressionism, not Expressionism. But it is a sunset scene, I think, over House of Parliament over the Thames. I think that's what it is. Yeah. Right. So, let's look at the next image. Interesting, this one. So here we have a ladder between two realms, two worlds. A ladder which starts off here, and deep beneath the water, it goes down, down, down to a completely different world. It's interesting. This is a sort of the fairy element, the fairy world. The idea that you take a ladder down to some sort of world, again, of supernatural quality. Something happens, it's hidden out of the way and beyond what people are used to looking at. and the idea that things lying beneath the water, things which are unknown, the water conceals that which is unknown. That's what I think. And then maybe there's a means thereby which someone can pass down to this world, climb down this ladder. But yes, that's what I'd say. And it seems to be a very different landscape. Of course, it's forest here. Here it's a shoreline. Here's forest, and that contrasts the two different terrains. It does, and also a sense of the impossibility of that. Not just because you've got trees underground, under the sea, but more because you can see the sun rising here. These cannot be the same planes, the same realms of existence, right? One has to be. It was almost like passing through this water, through this ladder. It's like a portal to another world. That's what it seems to be by the fact that there seems to be the sun rising or setting in the distance there. But it could also be maybe that is a question of perspective as well. That maybe this idea that maybe the depends on how you look at it. You can look at it from this side where this is up top is normal and this is the realm of the unexpected, or it could be the other way around. So that here is normal. It's in the forest, but look up, you can see maybe sky. And to us, maybe it is sky, but to someone else, it may be the ocean. Maybe to someone like a god figure or some sort of being above sees the blue of the sky as being almost like, like an ocean, and that this world lies beneath it. But I think what makes perhaps more sense is the other way I thought about it. It just seems to connect up better. Yeah. Okay, next image. How many images are there, by the way? Oh, two more. Okay. So this is, again, looks relatively 19th century, based on what seems to be a hair in a bun and a long gown, long dress. She is, what is she doing? What is she doing? Okay. Someone who, maybe she's someone who plays the piano, not sure. She's looking out of a window. Looking out the window. Right. Anything else we can say about this? She has her knee up on one chair. So maybe that's because she's spent some time looking out the window and she's resting up against a chair. Perhaps. I'm not sure what else it could be. I don't think she's about to jump out. I don't think there's anything too morbid like that. She hasn't opened the window. You think she'd open the window before, leaning up against a window like that. So I think she's just looking out and down. She's definitely looking down in that direction at something. I'm not sure what. Something's taking her curiosity. Maybe she was playing the piano, beginning in, there's no chair here, the chair is there. No, I think she moved, took the chair from the piano over there. The lid, is it open or closed? I think it's closed. Either way, she hasn't just jumped and run, but just have a page open. So I'm not sure how much she was caught in the moment of looking at the window. Maybe it was just there before people just left the paper. I think she just came in and is looking now down at whatever's going on. I don't know what it is. Something's going on. Ooh, okay. This is an interesting image. You can see that is a person. That is what a human is compared to whatever this huge relief is. These statues looming out of the gloom. And they are bats, it appears. Bats or birds, probably bats, because this looks quite morbid. These sort of hooded figures with a skull-like face. These are figures of death, almost, of some sort of ancient bygone age. But normally, if you're in an ancient bygone age, don't depict these tall figures as death, though. You can see this hooded. You can see there's like a skull, sunken in eyes. These are skulls. These are tall figures of Thanatos, of the Grim Reaper, you could say. And this person has wandered into this chasm, this narrow canyon, bordered by death. Different depictions of death, all lining up. And this, I think they all have skulls. I can't see them make up their faces too well. That's interesting. They're shining a light. They are navigating what seems to potentially be dangerous territory, going into the valley of death, perhaps. Maybe that's what it is, the valley of death. But it seems to be quite a blunt way of conveying the idea. I don't know. I think that's a skull. I'm not sure. That is certainly not a very comfortable place to be. No, I'd probably want to get out there rather quickly if I were there. It suggests maybe there's danger looming up, not at the moment, but maybe coming up. Because I think these are statues. They look like statues. They certainly seem fixed to the wall and all lined up as one. I don't think they're sort of, I don't know, gigantic skull-headed, hood-wearing giants or anything like that. I think they're carved out of the stone. I'm not sure. They're all doing something different. This one's reaching out a hand. This one is got their hands up in prayer, like an angel of death, for instance. That one has a hood off and is looking upwards. Interesting. Not sure how this ought to be interpreted. Okay, now on to the final question. Tell us about your own versions of your socionic type. What versions did other socionics or tests give you? Right. So, I've always thought myself to be an ILE. Most people who meet me tend to think I'm an ILE. And versions in other socionics tests, well, when I take a test, normally I get ILE. The only time people have actually disagreed with me, Galenko has typed me an EIE normalizing subtype, but that is a very, what's the word? That is, yeah, I've read the description, I don't relate to it. So I think ILE for me, but I'd be interested to know what you think, Timur. What do you think based on the model you use in this semantic method? That's I'm interested in seeing. Will I come out as maybe an LIE? Maybe I'll come out as an EIE, or maybe come out as, I don't know, some other type. Maybe a GAM. I think maybe either come out as an ILE in this or come out as an LIE, but we shall see. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you for watching. Sorry it's so bloody long. I had to answer where I felt like I had to answer. I just wanted to give you good answers. But thank you very much for tuning in, everyone, for watching as well. Thank you, Timur, for letting me do this questionnaire. Wishing you all the best and take care. Goodness, I completely forgot. I meant to actually end the broadcast. This is if you do this too long, get tired, is what you forget. Bye.